What happens when years of sacrifice and saving are undone by the very people a mother trusted most? One by one, her children's requests drained everything she had, until a single moment changed everything. Every morning for 30 years, Dolores Manning woke at dawn and filled the house with the aroma of coffee and the slow, steady rhythm of her careful routines. Her home, a modest two-bedroom on a quiet street, held the traces of decades of discipline: a quilt sewn from old shirts, a garden blooming with marigolds, and a battered metal tin tucked at the back of the pantry, heavy with coins and rolled-up bills. Dolores was proud of her thrift. Since her husband's death, she'd stretched every dollar, clipping coupons, buying day-old bread, patching clothes, and growing her own vegetables. She worked as a school cafeteria aide until arthritis slowed her hands, then babysat neighborhood kids, stacking every spare penny in that tin and in her small savings account. "This is for the future," she would say, pressing a few dollars into her grandkids' hands at Christmas. "I want you all to have a little something when I'm gone. Not much, but enough to make life easier." Her children, Teresa and Paul, knew about her savings. Teresa, the older daughter, lived 2 towns over, busy with her own family, always promising to visit more often. Paul, the younger son, drifted from job to job, sometimes staying with Dolores when things got rough. She gave willingly, always reminding herself that families stick together, and that help offered now would be repaid in love and care when she needed it most. This particular Monday, Dolores sat at the kitchen table with her checkbook, bills stacked on one side and a battered calculator on the other. She frowned at the rising utility costs, the property tax notice that had come in the mail, and the dwindling numbers in her savings account. Paul shuffled in, yawning, his hair wild from sleep. "Morning, Ma. Got any coffee left?" Dolores poured him a mug, adding cream the way he liked, and set out toast and jam. She watched him scan his phone, worry lines deepening on his brow. Paul's latest job, a delivery gig, had ended the week before. He'd come home late Friday night, shoulders slumped, mumbling about layoffs and unfair bosses. Dolores made him soup and let him talk, resisting the urge to scold or lecture. "Now," Paul poked at his toast, sighing. "Ma, I know it's a lot to ask, but can you spot me $50 for gas? I've got a lead on a new job, but I need to get to the interview." Dolores nodded, heart tight. She opened her wallet, counted the bills, and handed him 40. "It's all I have until my Social Security comes in next week." Paul hugged her, promising to pay her back as soon as he could. Later that day, Teresa called, her voice brisk and hurried, the background noise of children and barking dogs echoing through the phone. She asked about Dolores' health, offered news of her own kids, then, almost as an afterthought, mentioned that her car needed repairs and money was tight this month. "If you have a little extra, Mom, I'd pay you right back. Just until my paycheck clears." Dolores hesitated, then agreed to send a check for $100. "But you'll need to cash it quick, honey. The bank balance is getting low." "Thank you, Mom. I promise, next month will be easier." That night, Dolores opened the tin in the pantry, counting out what she had left. The stack was thinner than she remembered. She logged into her bank account, seeing the numbers dip lower with every small kindness extended to her children. Still, she reassured herself, this was what families did, helped one another in hard times. She closed her laptop, washed her hands, and made a simple dinner for herself and Paul. Before bed, Dolores sat at her sewing machine, mending Paul's work shirt and thinking about her own mother, who'd always said, "Never let your children see you worry." Dolores folded the shirt, pressed a kiss to Paul's forehead as he watched TV, and turned out the lights with a silent prayer that tomorrow might bring better news. As she lay in bed, listening to the distant hum of passing cars, Dolores clung to the belief that her sacrifices would be remembered, and that the savings she'd guarded so fiercely would not be wasted. The week unfolded in a steady stream of small demands and careful calculations. Dolores watched every penny, planning her meals with precision, measuring out coffee grounds, and making soups that could stretch across several days. Paul stayed at home most afternoons, filling out job applications on Dolores's old laptop, occasionally running errands or mowing the lawn, but mostly drifting from room to room, restless and anxious. Wednesday brought a cold rain that rattled the windows. Dolores walked to the mailbox in her raincoat, shoes squelching in the mud, collecting envelopes. Most were bills or advertisements, but one bore Teresa's handwriting. She opened it at the kitchen table, a thank-you card for the loan, with a scribbled IOU and a drawing from her youngest granddaughter. Dolores smiled, propping the card on the shelf, the small kindness brightening her day. Later, as Dolores prepared a casserole for dinner, Paul shuffled in, rubbing his neck. "Any word from Teresa?" Dolores nodded, gesturing to the card. "She's grateful. Says she'll pay me soon." Paul grunted, eyes drifting to the pantry. "You got any cash left, Ma? The landlord's hounding me about rent for that place I had last month." "Just a little, till I get work." Dolores hesitated, reaching for the tin. The stack was thinner still. She counted out $20, her voice gentle but weary. "That's all for now. We have to be careful." Paul took the money, mumbling thanks, and disappeared into his room. Dolores's chest tightened, the sense of helplessness creeping in. Thursday evening, Teresa called again. This time, her voice was strained. "Mom, the kids are sick. I've got to miss work. If there's anything left, just $50, I'll pay you back Friday. Please." Dolores hesitated. Her checking account balance was painfully low, the tin nearly empty. Still, she agreed to send what she could, promising herself she'd skip groceries this week, making do with beans and rice, old bread and garden greens. She filled out the check, hands trembling. Afterward, she sat in the living room, the silence thick. Paul's footsteps echoed from upstairs, his voice drifting down as he spoke quietly on the phone. Dolores heard him say, "Yeah, Ma's helping. I'll get the rest. Just give me time." On Friday, Paul came home late, smelling faintly of beer. He tossed his jacket on the chair, voice heavy. "Did you get my unemployment letter? I thought it was coming today." Dolores shook her head, swallowing her worry. "Maybe tomorrow." She made tea, urging him to eat the last of the casserole. Paul barely touched it, falling asleep on the couch while the TV flickered in the background. Saturday, Dolores checked her accounts. The savings she'd worked so hard to build, year after year, quarter after quarter, was nearly gone. A few $100s remained, just enough to cover next month's bills. She clung to hope, telling herself Teresa's next paycheck and Paul's new job would bring relief. She baked banana bread, wrapping half for Teresa's family and half for the freezer. She called Teresa to check on the kids, listening as her daughter listed out their fevers and the cost of medicine, then assured Dolores, "You're the only reason we're getting by, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you." Dolores smiled, swallowing the ache. When she hung up, she returned to her pantry, her tin now so light it rattled. She washed the breakfast dishes, wiped the counters, and sat by the window, watching rain trace patterns down the glass. That night, as Paul snored in his old room and the house settled into quiet, Dolores wondered if her children understood the cost of their requests, or the weight of the dreams she'd quietly set aside for them. By the following week, Dolores felt the squeeze of each decision more than ever. The price of milk and eggs seemed to climb by the day, and the lines at the local food pantry grew longer each time she walked past on her way to the post office. Still, Dolores kept her head high, determined to maintain her dignity and routine, even as her savings dwindled to numbers she hadn't seen since her first years as a widow. Paul had a job interview scheduled for Wednesday, a night shift at a warehouse on the edge of town. He borrowed Dolores's best dress shirt, promising to be careful with the cuffs. Dolores ironed it herself, pressing creases and sewing on a loose button, then packed a thermos of coffee and a sandwich for him. "Good luck, sweetheart. I know you'll do your best," she said, pressing a $5 bill into his hand for the bus. Paul left with a nod, shoulders set with a familiar mixture of hope and resignation. Dolores watched him go, whispering a prayer as his figure disappeared down the street. While he was out, Dolores made lists of what little she needed: bread, milk, toothpaste. She checked her accounts and saw that only $72 remained after her latest check to Teresa cleared. She counted her coins, gathering just enough for a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs, hoping they'd last the week. Teresa called that afternoon, sounding tired but cheerful. "The kids are finally better. I'm picking up some extra shifts this week, so I'll drop off what I owe you soon, Mom. Thank you again for everything." Dolores smiled into the phone, careful not to let her relief show too much. "Take care of yourself, honey. That's what matters." That evening, Paul returned, face pinched with disappointment. "Didn't get it, Ma. They said they needed someone with forklift experience. I tried, though." Dolores hugged him, offering what comfort she could. "Another job will come along. I know it." Later, she prepared a simple supper, potato soup with the last carrots from her garden. Paul barely ate, staring at his phone, texting friends about other job leads. Dolores washed dishes alone, her hands aching from the cold water. The next morning, Paul borrowed the car to go see a friend about landscaping work. Dolores packed him a lunch, tucked the last $10 bill from her wallet into his jacket, and watched him drive away. She swept the porch, weeded the garden, and tried to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her chest. When she checked her bank account, a wave of panic swept over her. Automatic deductions for insurance and utilities had gone through, leaving her with less than $30. She called the bank, asked if her Social Security would arrive on time, and was reassured, but the dread lingered. Teresa texted to say she'd mailed a small check as repayment. Dolores smiled at the gesture, but knew it would not last long. She remembered her own mother, teaching her to save for a rainy day. How strange, Dolores thought, that the storm had come from within her own family. That night, as Paul returned empty-handed and Dolores counted the coins in her tin for the third time, she felt her heart grow heavy. She reminded herself that she'd done what any mother would, helped her children, trusted them to remember her sacrifices. As she lay in bed, listening to Paul snoring softly in the next room, Dolores prayed that her children would find their footing soon, before the last of her savings vanished, leaving only love in its place. By Monday, Dolores's kitchen cupboards looked bare for the first time in years. She took inventory in the quiet morning, jotting down every can and box, willing the supplies to stretch just a little longer. She made oatmeal with water, not milk, and spread the last teaspoon of jam thinly over toast for herself and Paul. Paul spent the morning on the phone, pacing between the living room and porch, chasing down leads for odd jobs. Dolores listened with hope and anxiety as he argued with an old boss about unpaid wages, then called a cousin for work cleaning out garages. Each time, he came back into the kitchen, shaking his head. Midday, Dolores walked to the corner store, clutching a worn envelope with Teresa's small check inside. She cashed it, fingers trembling as she accepted the bills, just enough to buy coffee, potatoes, and a pack of bread. The clerk smiled kindly and slipped an extra banana into her bag, whispering, "On the house, Mrs. Manning." Dolores blinked back tears and thanked him twice. Back home, Paul had a friend over, a young man with a tattooed arm and paint splatters on his jeans. They talked in low voices about scraping together money for a landscaping gig, then left together, promising to return for dinner. Dolores cleaned the kitchen, made a pot of potato stew, and hung laundry in the backyard, her mind turning over numbers and prayers. She called Teresa, checking in about her work and the children. Teresa sounded distracted but assured her, "It's getting better, Mom. Hang in there. We'll all get caught up soon." Paul and his friend returned at dusk, mud on their boots and a $20 bill between them. They handed it to Dolores, insisting she keep it for groceries. For a moment, Dolores felt a flicker of hope, her son trying, however little, to ease the burden. They ate stew together, laughter rising briefly as Paul's friend told stories from high school. Dolores smiled, grateful for the moment of normalcy. After the dishes were washed and Paul's friend gone, Dolores sat at the kitchen table and counted what she had left, a few bills in her wallet, half a loaf of bread, one more serving of stew. She made a list for tomorrow: eggs, apples, tea if she could afford it. She stared at the empty tin in the pantry, memories of years of saving flooding her with sorrow. Paul came in, voice hopeful. "Ma, I've got a lead on steady work. Might take a week to start, but it's something." Dolores smiled, brushing his hair from his eyes as she did when he was a boy. "You'll find your way, Paul. I know you will." That night, she lay awake, the house quiet but for the tick of the clock and the distant hum of passing cars. Dolores whispered thanks for small mercies, Paul's effort, Teresa's check, the kindness of strangers, and prayed for the strength to face another day. But beneath her hope, a worry lingered. What if the future held nothing but empty shelves and unanswered promises? The days turned colder. Dolores wrapped herself in her old sweater, turning the thermostat down to save on heat. She made soup from scraps and watered down the last bit of milk for her morning coffee, hiding the changes from Paul as best she could. Paul's mood had shifted. He was restless but determined, heading out early each day in search of work. Sometimes he came home with a little cash, sometimes just excuses and tired eyes. One evening, he brought Dolores a sack of bruised apples and a smile, telling her, "Guy at the fruit stand owed me a favor." They made applesauce together in the tiny kitchen. Dolores showed Paul how to slice away the bruises and simmer the fruit with cinnamon. He listened quietly, hands sticky with juice, asking questions about her own childhood, the way her mother saved every penny during the leanest years. In the afternoons, Dolores visited the community center for a free meal, something she'd never imagined herself doing. She sat among other seniors, chatting about weather and grandchildren, her pride soothed by the warmth of the soup and the kindness of strangers. On her way home, she stopped at the food pantry, accepting a small bag of canned goods and pasta. She tucked them into her purse, cheeks flushed, telling herself it was only until Paul and Teresa found their feet again. Teresa called to check in, her voice less hurried but more anxious. "We're making it, Mom. I'll send something next week. I swear." Dolores answered gently, "Don't worry about me, honey. Just take care of the kids. That's what matters." At night, Dolores mended clothes and sorted old photos, finding comfort in memories: her wedding, Paul and Teresa as children, birthdays crowded with laughter and cake. She placed a framed photo of her family on her bedside table, a small reminder of the love that remained, even as her resources ran low. One afternoon, the landlord stopped by to remind Dolores that rent would soon be due. She nodded, heart pounding, promising herself she would find a way. Paul came home late, empty-handed but hopeful. He'd heard of another warehouse looking for workers, and he'd promised to try again. To distract herself, Dolores baked bread using the last of the flour. The house filled with its warm, yeasty scent, a rare comfort. She set aside half a loaf for Teresa's family, dropping it at her daughter's door the next morning with a note: "Love you always, Mom." Paul returned with news: a job interview, scheduled for Monday. Dolores ironed his shirt, shining his shoes, tucking a small prayer into his jacket pocket when he wasn't looking. "You're going to do great, sweetheart," she said, her hope soft but strong. That evening, as they shared the last of the bread, Dolores realized how much she'd given up: the savings, the comfort, her pride. But as she watched Paul's tired face light up with the possibility of work, she knew she'd do it all again. For her children, for their future, for the hope that things might finally turn. The pantry was nearly bare, but Dolores's spirit, though battered, refused to break. Monday dawned gray and wet. Dolores rose before sunrise, ironing Paul's shirt one last time, packing him a simple lunch, just a boiled egg and the last apple. Paul left for his interview with a nervous smile, promising to call as soon as he had news. The house felt emptier than ever. Dolores swept the kitchen, watered her plants, and tried to ignore the gnaw of hunger in her stomach. She took stock of her cupboards: 1 can of beans, a few potatoes, some rice, and a half-empty jar of instant coffee. She told herself it would be enough for a day or two. Around noon, the phone rang. Teresa's number flashed on the screen. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we got another bill, medical this time. Is there anything left? Even a little?" Dolores swallowed hard, voice steady. "I'll see what I can do." She checked her purse and counted out the last of the pantry tin's coins. It wasn't much, but she promised to send what she could. That afternoon, Paul returned, face bright with hope for the first time in weeks. "I got it, Ma. It's not much, part-time, nights, but it's a start. I can start paying you back soon." Dolores hugged him fiercely, pride welling in her chest even as her worry deepened. She made a celebratory dinner with what she had: a thin bean stew, rice, and the last crust of bread. Paul ate like a man starved, and for a while, the kitchen filled with laughter and relief. The joy was short-lived. The next morning, the landlord returned, asking for rent. Dolores stalled, promising payment by week's end, heart-pounding with dread. She spent the day calling utility companies, asking for extensions, trying to buy time. She walked to the food pantry, accepting whatever was offered: canned corn, pasta, a loaf of day-old bread. That night, Paul left early for work, his new uniform a size too big, but his posture straight with pride. Dolores stayed up late, writing a letter to Teresa. "I'll always help however I can. But things are tight now. I love you. Always remember that." She dropped the letter at the post office in the morning, then sat in her living room with a mug of weak coffee, watching the sun crawl across the worn carpet. The house was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the creak of settling wood. As the week crawled by, Dolores rationed every meal, skipped lunch to make dinner stretch, and bundled in sweaters rather than turning up the heat. Paul brought home his first small paycheck, pressing the bills into Dolores's hand. She kissed his forehead, fighting back tears. She sent half the money to Teresa, keeping only what was needed to keep the lights on a little longer. In the quiet, Dolores wondered how long her strength would last, and if her children truly understood the cost of the help they so easily accepted. That night, Dolores sat in her chair, hands folded, whispering prayers for tomorrow, for food, for peace, for the courage to keep giving, even as everything she'd saved for herself slipped away. By Friday, the strain had reached its limit. Dolores woke with aching joints and a hollow ache in her stomach, the result of too many skipped meals. She bundled up and walked to the corner market, clutching a few crumpled bills, buying only what was strictly necessary: a sack of rice, a carton of eggs, and a bruised head of cabbage. Paul, exhausted from his first week of night shifts, slept through most of the day. When he woke, he shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Ma, I'm sorry I haven't helped more. I'll pick up groceries with my next check. I promise." Dolores squeezed his hand, reassuring him with a tired smile. "You're doing your best, sweetheart. That's all a mother can ask." That afternoon, Teresa called again. Her voice was raw with stress and shame. "I just got the letter, Mom. I'm so sorry you're struggling. I had no idea how bad it was. Please don't send any more money. I'll find a way." Dolores's voice wavered, but she kept it steady. "We do what we must for family, honey. You'd do the same for me." Teresa sniffled, promising to visit soon, but Dolores could hear the distance in her words. As the day wore on, Dolores began to feel dizzy and weak. She drank water, ate a meager dinner of cabbage soup, and tried to rest, but her mind spun with worry. The rent was due in 2 days. She had already stretched every penny. There was nothing left to give. Paul left for work in the early evening, pausing at the door. "We'll get through this, Ma. I'll take extra shifts. I'll figure something out." Dolores nodded, but as soon as the door closed, she allowed herself to cry for the first time in months. Later that night, she sat at the table, sorting through old bank statements, letters, and receipts, proof of every sacrifice, every quiet withdrawal, every IOU repaid with a promise instead of cash. She realized, with a hollow certainty, that she had nothing left to offer except her love. Exhausted, she fell asleep in her chair, the glow of the kitchen light flickering above her. She dreamed of better times, holidays filled with laughter, savings that seemed endless, children who never asked for more than she could give. When Paul returned at dawn, he found Dolores still at the table, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her breathing slow and shallow. He knelt beside her, tears streaking his face as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Ma. I'm so sorry." The sun rose, casting golden light through the window, illuminating a home stripped bare of everything but love and memory. The morning was unusually quiet. Paul moved softly through the house, afraid to disturb Dolores as she slept in the armchair. When she finally woke, her eyes were tired but gentle, her voice just a whisper. Paul brewed her a cup of tea and sat beside her, neither speaking for a long time. The old routine, morning coffee, gentle conversation, felt fragile, as if it might break under the weight of all that had happened. Teresa arrived later that day, 2 of her children in tow. She hugged Dolores tightly, pressing her cheek against her mother's gray hair. "I'm here, Mom. I'm so sorry," she said. Dolores smiled, holding her daughter's hand. The children filled the house with laughter and small arguments, chasing each other from room to room. For a while, the old warmth returned, and Dolores felt a glimmer of peace. They ate a simple lunch, scrambled eggs, bread, applesauce. Teresa tried to leave money on the kitchen counter, but Dolores gently pressed it back into her hand. "Take care of your family. That's what matters," she whispered. Paul watched the exchange, shame and gratitude mingling in his eyes. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Teresa helped Dolores to bed for a nap. She sat beside her mother, stroking her hand, tears slipping silently down her face. Dolores drifted off, comforted by the presence of her family, even as her body felt weaker than ever before. Paul tidied the house while Teresa looked through Dolores's papers, letters, bank statements, notes scribbled in the margins of old checkbooks. The full weight of her mother's sacrifice became clear, and Teresa wept quietly in the kitchen, holding a faded photo of all of them together. When Dolores woke again, evening had fallen. Paul and Teresa sat with her in the living room, the children curled up with storybooks nearby. No one spoke of money, bills, or jobs. They just sat together, letting the silence be filled by love, sorrow, and the quiet hope that forgiveness might someday ease the ache in their hearts. Dolores squeezed her children's hands, her voice steady but soft. "You're all I ever wanted. All I ever needed." Tears spilled as Paul and Teresa leaned in, promising they would take care of her now, that things would be different, that they would find a way to give back what had been lost. The house was still, but full in a new way. In the hush of night, as Dolores listened to the gentle breathing of her family around her, she finally allowed herself to rest, her savings gone, but her love unspent.